I can't think of anybody I want to spend more time with on Coast to Coast than Glenn Kimball, the man in charge of Kimball College, a guy whose business has grown from the kind of procurement of original sort of obscure texts into virtual textbooks. And he does. He has whole courses that you can take in these ancient manuscripts. And this is not too surprising that he should find something as new and as interesting as this. Bigfoot in ancient manuscripts, giant apes, references to a disappearing species, perhaps maybe even a separate semi-civilizations, a competing group of hominids that has been there all along. If we just knew where to look, we know where to look. With Glenn Kimball next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Putting the finishing touches on the blog for tonight so that if you missed crypto news last hour, you can grab it coming up in just a second. It's got Bigfoot stuff in it, and I say Bigfoot stuff. That's nothing compared to the big stuff that they've been coming up with over at Kimball College. Good evening, Glenn Kimball. Always a pleasure.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to be with you too, my good friend.
Now, who was invited to speak this year at the graduation ceremonies at Kimball College? Who was it? And when is my invitation coming to speak with these earnest young learners as they're going off into the world?
Well, we're going into your backyard in December, at least in L.A. You're not in L.A., but...
Are you opening up an L.A. branch?
No, we're negotiating something rather special.
Okay. Well, I don't know what that special is, but is it like are we talking like TV special? We're talking about Glenn Kimball hosting his own show?
Well, it very much has to do with premiere.
Okay. All right. Well,
but I shall keep the confidence.
Okay. All right. Well, I understand that. Glenn, I guess let's start with the website and how this show is described as 2,000-year-old documents. Obviously, many of the Bible manuscripts are much older than 2,000 years. So let's begin there. Which manuscripts, what documents have you been finding useful in your pursuit of mentions of giant apes or Bigfoot-like creatures?
Well, we will do that, but we live in a very special last couple of days.
What do you mean by that?
Oh, something absolutely that has never happened in the history of the world has happened in the last 2 days with regard to what we talk about. It's been the first time in the history of the world we have given, or somebody in the world has given civil rights, namely the Spanish Parliament gave civil rights to, do you know who it was?
Well, I'm going to guess and say Sasquatch.
Apes.
Apes. Oh, yeah, I did hear about this. This has been an interesting movement going on to try to expand the definition of human and do it on the basis of intelligence, and that the apes are smart enough to be included as needing rights. Is that right?
That's true, and we do not know the secret little innuendo that might also be involved with.
Well, I don't know what that means. What do you mean by that?
Well, perhaps they are giving civil rights to apes for an additional reason.
Okay. Tell me.
Because of certain entities that seem to be walking the earth.
That they're going to extend human rights to apes so that should they discover a Bigfoot, the Bigfoot could slide right into that category of ape.
Well, currently right now, if you were to meet a Sasquatch in the street or in the forest or wherever you were to meet him, it would be within your constitutional rights to pull out your gun and shoot him dead.
Okay, which, right, if you felt like you were, right, attacked or...
Yeah, well, who's ever been attacked by a Bigfoot? Those instances are rare, if any.
Okay.
That could be believed. But certainly in Spain, you would have a very serious difficulty in shooting an ape. And as a matter of fact, in the last couple of days, they have the poachers have killed 6 of the great apes, which we saw in the news being carried out of the great mountain apes, which constitutes roughly 1% of all the great apes known to man in our day. I had the opportunity, and it was a great privilege for me to have a long conversation with Jeff McCollum. And I don't know if you know who Jeff McCollum is.
I know Jeff Meldrum in the
Meldrum,
UFO.
excuse me.
Meldrum. Oh, that you meant. Yeah, Jeff Meldrum, of course, the professor from, is it Idaho State or Boise State? The Montana. I can't remember what university he's with, but of course he's been doing the kind of the cutting edge work on UFO on Bigfoot research. And
little did I know before we did the show that my brother is his publisher.
You didn't know that?
I did not know that.
Okay, how often do you talk to your brother?
Well, my brother lives in a different state than I do, and he and I publish very different kinds of things.
Not too different.
Well,
your brothers
we cross trails occasionally, but the kinds of things that he gets involved with occasionally. He has he told me today. He says, I have a vault in a bank that has been sealed for 40 years, not to be opened until after my death. He has come across some things that he feels will be quite disturbing for the general population.
Wait. So your brother has found some things that he's keeping in a vault that he only wants opened after his death.
That's correct.
Why wouldn't he want to share what he's got in his vault in his lifetime with the rest of us?
Well, he certainly won't share it with me. I'm just his brother.
Right. Well, I don't know. I mean, you know what I love here? I love the Kimball family of mysteries. Yeah. Well, you guys are always working on something you can't tell everybody about. Well, were you guys like this as kids? Were you always coming up with stuff and then not being able to tell anybody else about it?
Well, I would love to tell. You know, this brings up an interesting story. I met one of my mentors in history, the great Hugh Nibley, back when I was going to college, and Hugh was a very interesting character. He gave little credence whatsoever to what he was wearing. And I remember the day because he was wearing a green and yellow plaid shirt, a black cotton suit, and a golf cap and boat sneakers. But I had been collecting ancient texts for quite some time when I used to teach his son, who was a rather shy introvert, when I was teaching forensics in high school. And I taught his son. His son came to me one time and said, "My father's not a very good speaker, and Hugh was not, though he was a brilliant man. Died this year. Could speak 18 foreign languages, which I cannot. You know."
No.
But
are you getting enough sleep? You sound a little tired.
I am a little bit tired, and I spent one day in the emergency room this week. So,
well, I hope you're okay. But I think the last time we talked to you, you had just gotten out of the hospital too. You got to take better care of yourself, Glenn.
Me and the hospital are becoming good friends.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Now you got to live long enough to find out what your brother's stuck in his vault that he won't tell you about.
Yeah. Well, getting back to this story with you, Nibley, was rather interesting. I had been collecting ancient texts for some time, and I walked up to Hugh and I said, "Hugh, why in the world don't you tell the world what you know? Because I know what you know." And he looked at me with that enigmatic smile, and he said, "Mr. Kimball," he said, "I walk a fine razor's edge between what I know and what I can say to my brethren." And I said, "Then you're a coward."
You said that to him?
I said it right to his face, and he smiled, and he said, he put his arm around me, and I have come to understand what he meant. There are many, many, many things that we would like to say to the public. There are things that I would like to tell the listening audience tonight that if I were to say them, there would be people that would want my blood. And I don't understand it.
Why? Who would want your blood? I defy you to prove that. What would you have to say to us that would make people want to kill you?
Well, I can give you only an example. A couple of years ago, I like to sit on the veranda and talk with my children. People would pay to listen to me and my son talk about history. It's quite interesting.
Okay. But why would anybody want to kill you for something that you know?
Because I think it would offend populations of people.
Okay.
I know some things about the Islamic religion, for example, where they would love to kill me should I to say it openly in public. And certainly in Christian circles, having discovered things in text with regard to what Jesus thought in his lifetime and spoke about in his lifetime, it got him killed, and I'm a much lesser creature than him.
Okay. Well, true, but I mean, there were some Roman authorities involved in that, and he wasn't. He was a threat to their peace, and you're not a threat to anybody. We'd all protect you. We'd put you in hiding. You come to my house, Glenn. If anybody's trying to kill you, come here, okay? But let's get back to the question about what manuscripts were you looking into when you found evidence of giant apes or Bigfoot. What were you looking into from 2,000 years ago?
Well, the one in particular I was looking at was the Dadam Imu Eva text that I sent to you, where it was a text taken by Joseph of Arimathea to Great Britain back after the crucifixion. Joseph of Arimathea, for those of you who do not know, was more like the foster father of Jesus after Joseph the carpenter died when Jesus was about 15 years old. And the Bible suggests that he was a very wealthy merchant. Well, that's quite an understatement for him. He was very, very wealthy. He did a great deal of trade with the Far East with regard to tin and lead, and I suspect that he traded much more than just the tin and lead from Great Britain to Great Britain, to China and back and forth, and was quite a wealthy man. Afforded Jesus all the opportunity in terms of the financial underwriting he needed to do the traveling that he did. We know a little bit about it from the Bible, because in John 21:25, the best friend of Jesus said, "And many things Jesus did, I suppose if they were all written, the world itself could not contain all the books that should be written." We have merely 70 sayings of Jesus in the Holy Bible. Where's the rest of it? And people have asked me that forever, and I tell them quite frankly, and they would like to hang me for what I say. And what I say is that it's in the libraries of the world. And if you have a good library card, you can access a lot of it.
Sure. Nobody wants to hang you. Nobody wants to hang Glenn Kimball. They want to hang with Glenn Kimball, but they don't want to hang you. So
well, there's a lot of people who would be my dutiful friends who would hang with me, but when they would realize that where these documents are, they would like to suggest to me that I have betrayed the Lord by accepting the words of Christ from some other culture or entity.
All right. Well, let's get back to this text though, because I think this is so interesting. So you're looking in this 2,000-year-old text from Joseph of Arimathea. How do you find evidence of Bigfoot at a time like that?
Well, he mentions that at the time of the coming of Adam and Eve, obviously the book Dadam or Adam, and Mu Eva is referencing Eve, Mu Eve, that there was a civilization on the earth that were called the ape people. These people survived the cataclysm prior to the coming of Adam and Eve, and had lived simultaneously on the earth since the time of the Neanderthal man. Now we know that Neanderthal man, that the latest bones that we have of them of Neanderthal man are about 23,000 years old, which certainly puts him to be a contemporary of the anthropological bones that we have found of human beings as well. So Neanderthal and human beings were contemporary, even though the first Neanderthals that were found in Africa were much older than that.
Right. So you got Neanderthals being very old petering out by the time we see the rise of the Homo sapien.
That's correct.
Okay. And so, go ahead.
They probably weren't petering out, and that's what I wanted to say on the air tonight. They were just learning where to bury their dead. If you were to walk the Americas today, how many human bones would you find in the plains of Oklahoma, for example? 0.
Right.
And there's 230 million people in America today. How many bones would you find anywhere? You wouldn't find them anywhere. Well, these ape people were extremely bright people, according to the text. They had developed technologies and had learned a civilization over a period of time that had advanced along simultaneously and parallel to our own. And speaking with Jeff Neldron, he and I would take issue on that. He being the consummate scientist, and in my interviews with him, we agreed to disagree on that particular point of view.
Well, what point of view is that precisely? That Neanderthal could have been Bigfoot?
Well, certainly he doesn't think it was Bigfoot. He doesn't believe that the sightings of Bigfoot in our day are intelligent creatures, that they are animals, that they are the fifth level of apes that live in the world today. Perhaps the rest of the populations of the Yeti, etc., that live around the world are the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th populations. He reminded me that that the great ape in Africa lives in a population of about 600 to 700 individuals, and has not suffered because of the lack of the diversity of the DNA, and has been able to sustain itself over the centuries. And today we lost 1% of them in a massacre, which I found enormously tragic. But he would suggest that these populations were very small, and therefore the reason we don't find their bones in the forest is because there aren't very many of them. And my comment to him was, well, have you ever considered the fact that perhaps they had advanced simultaneously with our civilizations, had developed an intelligence, and in fact had learned to live in their traditional home, which was underground?
All right, stop right there, because this is where I know it's going to heat up. So let me just identify then some of the issues we'll get to in the next half hour with Glenn Kimball, that we're going to talk about how it's the possibility that there were ancient Bigfoot-like civilizations that may be related to hominids. They may be more human than animal. They might have been the ancestors of the Neanderthal, and that they might have lived underground. Do I got the next half hour laid out all right?
You got it on the nose.
Okay, where would they have been living underground? What proof could there be of underground Bigfoot civilizations in ancient texts? We'll find out more from the guy who researches them all the time, Glenn Kimball, next on Coast to Coast AM on a Sunday night. This is Ian Punnett. Well, Glenn Kimball himself is gigantic in the business of ancient manuscripts, both procuring them and distributing them. You can find out more if you go to our website, coasttocoastam.com. It'll link up to my blog there, too. But it'll take you right there to Glenn Kimball and Kimball College, where you can get your own hands on these ancient manuscripts and do your own studies on these as well. Fascinating material on a wide variety of subjects. And in this case, it's ancient Bigfoot civilizations, not just a sort of advanced animal species, but a separate hominid species that might, in fact, have been so sophisticated as to have created their villages underground, their burial places underground. And that if we ever found where they were, we would find perhaps generations upon generations of bones. We'll talk about what Glenn Kimball says is proof for this in Ancient Manuscripts next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. So Glenn Kimball, again, looking in documents that are credited to Joseph of Arimathea, sees evidence of a separate Bigfoot-like, a great ape-like civilization. Now, what is it specifically, Glenn, that you see in this document, which is kind of under the at least it's attributed to Joseph of Arimathea?
Well, let me answer that, but let me answer your previous question first. And that was, what might be a topic that might get me killed? Okay? Remember that I have read and know and collected the ancient temple protocols, and even those who think they understand an ancient temple protocol do not understand. Remember that when the Templars were digging in the mount, there were 9 of them. They were French noblemen that were digging in the Temple Mount, and they found, according to Dan Brown, excuse me, they found something underneath the Temple Mount that caused them such excitement that they threw it on the back of a horse and galloped it back to France.
Mm-hmm.
Most people feel like that might have been the Holy Grail. Well, that wouldn't have been significant enough to throw on the back of a horse and gallop it to France. It had to be something that could raise a great deal of money very quickly. What they found was the original temple protocol in the tunnels underneath the Temple Mount, and there are many. They are spacious, and they are multi-leveled.
Right. Well, there's no doubt, there's no argument about the number of tunnels that exist under the Temple Mount in Israel, some of which can be accessed from the Israeli side, some of which can't be. Well, some of which is controlled by the Muslims who control the mosque on top of the Temple Mount, as I understand it. But so when you say the protocols, what is it that you mean? Why would that have been so earth-shattering?
These are the temple ceremonies. These are the events that happen inside of a temple, and when they carried them back to France or to Brittany specifically, all they had to do was announce that, hey, now we have the temple protocol or the actual ceremonies that belong inside a temple that gave these people the ability to discover stars without telescopes and quantum mechanics without microscopes and to develop agriculture and to discover all kinds of scientific protocols. These are the things we ought to reverse engineer, if anything. That all they had to do was announce that, and every poor person, every rich person gave every cent they had in order for them to go back and regain the territory necessary to build a temple so that they could get this process underway. And that's when the Crusades began, by the way. The Crusades were originally, the Templars were allies of the Suleiman and the Islamic community, and then suddenly they became ardent enemies, fighting over the ground of the temple. They realized that to put these temples back into operation would have been a greatest discovery in the history of mankind. Dan Brown thought that perhaps the discovery that they found was the secret that Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene, and he put that in his book, The Da Vinci Code. That's not what they found.
Okay, very interesting.
That wouldn't have made them rich overnight. That wouldn't have caused the Crusades to occur. The only thing that could have caused that kind of an event would have been to actually discover these things. Well, I know them, and should anyone, and at the very end of those ceremonies, you offer your allegiance and your life, and there would be people come to take my life if I were to expose those kinds of things in public. They were considered sacred, not secret. They were considered things that only the high priest or the priesthood itself had access to or had the rights to. And that's the kind of thing that could get you killed by any number of organizations instantly. But now you talk about Joseph of Arimathea. Joseph of Arimathea did not write these ancient documents dealing with Adam and Eve. He got them from an Essene tradition, which was a tradition that was known worldwide. Every single culture on the planet had its own tradition, and they were largely written traditions about the creation story. And in most of those, if not all of those, was a description of the civilizations that survived the last cataclysm, and would also include the civilization of ape people. Now, if you were to go back and study people like Hesiod, who lived during the time of Homer, Hesiod wrote the Theologica, for example. He tells you that there were 5 civilizations intended for this world. 4 of them have ended in a cataclysm. The only remnants that have survived those cataclysms have been people who were blessed or great people that were like Jeremiah survived the Babylonian conquest because he was a prophet. These were magnificent human beings. And when the Bible talks about fallen angels, he's not talking about angels that committed sin. He's talking about angels that had lived in a fallen society but had an angelic character. And so we have a very probably distorted opinion about the Nephilim. These Nephilim had their feet on one side, half in the boat and half out of the boat. They had the ability to talk to the fourth level societies, or what the Bishu Kaku would call a fourth level society, or God. And these are the people who had the power to create a universe. They were a society that had the power to create a universe. And so these people had, all over the world, had these written traditions about the creation of the world. Now, this is not such a bizarre topic, Ian, because the documents covering caves and the fact that caves were dwelling places for very good men, very smart men who used caves to protect them from cataclysmic events, are many and varied. For example, in one of the documents I sent you on the creation story, it said God created the earth like a sponge, where there were the waters of the firmament were below the ground, on the ground, and in the heavens above. And these were places that were hollowed out by the waters or the living force of the universe, and could also be used as homelands for individuals that would protect them from the cataclysmic events that happened on the surface of the earth. There are almost no studies done until recently with regard to cave dwelling or the domestic events that happened in caves that are located around the world. Some of these caves are enormous. If you go to Mammoth Cave, for example, on the east side of the United States, the Mammoth Cave has over 3,000 miles of mapped corridors, and they say that there's probably that many more that are unmapped. When I was living in Bolivia, they talked about a cavern system that went all the way from the high plains of Tiwanaku all the way down into Cusco. And there are armies of people that went back and forth that were able to travel back and forth, protected from their adversaries by the caves. There's writings about the caves between Costa Rica and Venezuela. There's writings about caves in China and Africa. Certainly the caves that were underneath the Judea are very famous. There's a cavernous system located under Constantinople. I've had letters and correspondence with the librarians that have enormous libraries hidden beneath the Hagia Sophia, preserved from even the governments of Turkey and the governments of Greece, etc. that they're saving those things until our day. As a matter of fact, my own son, we were here just not too long ago when we had a knock on the door, and there was a guy there that was in full Mayan dress, and he claimed to have been the leader or the representative of the last of the 6 existing Mayan tribes. Now, there are, according to historians, the Mayans died out and are no more. Well, these Mayans live underground in the places like Pilar, in Belize. They live in these cavernous systems that are 5 levels deep. If you saw the History Channel today, they actually went down into some of those caves, and some of them were beautiful and wonderful, very long, very extensive places to live, places where the high priests or the kings would go and get knowledge from the people that were underground. Now, I didn't invent that. That's a History Channel. That was on the History Channel television this afternoon.
Well, that doesn't surprise me. The idea of underground civilizations or people, excavating secret areas so that they could survive outside of the harsh glare of whatever government was oppressing them, that's one thing. But to think about that being a Bigfoot civilization, that's different.
Well, the Bigfoot civilization, when you're talking about escaping a cataclysm, all the life forms that escaped the last cataclysm were life forms like mammals that could escape underground and protect themselves from the cataclysmic event, which was probably a meteor that hit the Earth. These were things that were of a size and to fit into these cavernous systems and protect themselves from these cataclysmic events. If it had not been for those things, we wouldn't be around today.
Okay, well, that's fine. But again, if you're talking about, a woodchuck, you're talking about gophers, you're talking about small mammals. If you're talking about a Bigfoot, you're talking about something that's 7 feet tall.
That's correct. And some of these cavernous areas are hundreds of feet tall, 50 to 100 feet tall, and have sources of water, sources of game, fish. I was one of the directors of amateur music at the Knoxville World's Fair, and took tours to the underground sea. They called it the underground sea. They're near Knoxville, Tennessee, where you could go in and actually sail on an underground ocean, an underground lake, and fish and hunt.
Right, and I imagine fish for blind fish.
Well, some of them were, most of them were, but those that had access, those creatures which had access to the outside, weren't blind and they weren't albino. The ones that lived exclusively in the caves were blind and largely were albino in nature.
Pigmentless, right.
But the ones that had access to the exterior, much like Bigfoot had access to the exterior from time to time, they were not blind.
Okay.
They could see, and they had color in the pigments of their skins and in their eyes, etc. And so when you go up to the northeast coast in Washington State and Northern California, looking for sightings for Bigfoot, and they put all of these infrared and timed and motion detector type cameras trying to catch a glimpse of a Bigfoot, it's extremely unlikely that they're going to be able to do that, because these things are not in clusters and living in above ground or surface dwelling colonies. They're hidden someplace. They're gone someplace. The only place they could have gone is underground, because they don't live in airplanes.
Right. So you think even right now in the Great Northwest that there are, if we find the right hole, it'll lead us to an underground civilization of existing Bigfoot families?
I think that there's little doubt that that's the case. If you were to talk to Red Elk, he would agree.
I'm sure he would. Now, interestingly enough, though, I imagine Jeff Meldrum wouldn't agree, right? I mean,
No, Jeff Meldrum would not agree. He would claim that mammals are largely surface dwellers. They don't live underground. And all due respect to this great man, and Jeff Meldrum is a consummate scientist. He's an anthropologist, geneticist of the highest quality. And he and I began our conversation kind of at odds with each other. And he says, I really don't appreciate wacko topics and bizarre associations. And I said, Jeff, you're involved in a wacko topic, bizarre topic, the Bigfoot. Anyway, well, that's true.
So to go back to the ancient manuscripts, though, where do you see evidence of, in an ancient manuscript, them talking about a great ape? But where does it say? I mean, does Joseph of Arimathea talk about this, where he says, yes, look over there, there's a civilization of, hairy hominids? I mean, is there something that you can hang your hat on that says, right there, that's the reference from a credible witness that there were these sophisticated family and or groups of of small civic groups of these tribes existing?
Yes, I sent you one.
Yes, I know, Glenn, but this is where you fill in the blank. Okay,
I fill in the blank.
Okay, see, this is where I ask the question.
You ask the question,
and then you say, "Yes, there is."
Yes,
see,
there is.
I know you have an answer. This is where you supply it.
Oh, that's right.
I could interview myself if you'd like. I could pull up the documents you sent and ask me. I can go through it and just read them, but I would really...
You're such a close brother that I forget that from time to time.
Okay.
So... We need a party together. We need to sit down and and share a meal together one of these days.
Okay.
So... And we will. I promise you we shall. But you're right. And they were Essene documents, and the Essenes had their knowledge from the great temple at Knossos, which was a Greek temple that had been around for 1,000 years. And the Greeks, part of the reason why the Bible was written in Greek, and there are many, many people who have asked the question, why was the original Bible written in the Greek? It must have been written in the language of Christ. It had to have been written in Aramaic. And that's the Lamas Foundation. And I appreciate the good people from the Lamas Foundation. They found a copy of the Bible written in Aramaic in the Vatican Library. Of course, you could find a lot of things in the Vatican Library.
True. Here's what I want to find coming up. I want to find that very specific. I want to hear what those ancient documents say that point to specific sort of, a context where it specifically says a group of Bigfoot or giant ape-like creatures and how it was described. We'll get to that coming up in just a minute on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett.